In this movie, we're going to add the stars to our sky, and along the way, I'll show you how to align a layer to a selection outline, and I'll also show you how to load the selection from a layer so that you can use it to cut a hole in a different layer. I'll go ahead and switch over to my image so far, and I'm going to click on a sky layer to make it active, and that way the next layer I add will appear between the sky and Mars layers. And now I'll go ahead and switch over to that image, which is a photograph from the Hubble Space Telescope. Now, armed with my rectangular marquee tool, I'll right-click inside the image window and I'll choose Duplicate Layer. And I'll go ahead and name this new layer Stars, and I'll change the document from the one I'm in to Rocks with Planet, which is what I've called my image so far. And then I'll go ahead and click OK in order to create that new layer. And now I'll move over to the Rocks with Planet layer. And notice, for whatever reason, Photoshop forgot my layer name, which means I just need to double click on the word background right there and rename it Stars like so. All right, now let's say I want to align it to a selection outline, which is a great way to work inside Photoshop, because whenever you attempt to align a couple of layers with each other, it's possible that both of the layers will move. But if you align a layer to a selection outline, the selection outline will remain in place and the layer will align to it. So let's go ahead and load that selection outline, and I'm going to do it by loading this layer mask right here, the one associated with the sky layer, as a selection, and you do that by pressing and holding the Control key or the Command key on the Mac. And notice that gives you a little marquee next to your pointing finger cursor, at which point, if you click on that layer mask, you'll load it as a selection outline. So once again, anytime you want to load a selection from a layer mask, you just Control-click on its thumbnail here on the PC. That's a Command click on the Mac. And now that I have that selection, I can align this layer to it. And you do that by switching to the Move tool, and then you have a handful of alignment icons here in the Options bar. And so notice, if I go ahead and click on this Align Vertical Centers icon, that will bump the stars upward, but leave the selection outline in place. So now we have a layer that is center aligned to that selection. If I want it bottom aligned instead, then I'll go ahead and click on this third icon in Align Bottom Centers, and that will align the layer whose thumbnail you can see here inside the Layers panel so that its bottom edge is aligned to that, once again, stationary selection outline. All right, so now I'm just going to go ahead and deselect the image by pressing Control-D or Command-D on the Mac. Now, let's say that's not exactly where I want the stars to appear, and based on experience with this image, I do have a numerical coordinate in mind. Anytime you want to move a layer by the numbers, then you need to go up to the Edit menu and choose Free Transform, or press Control-T or Command-T on the Mac, and that way you'll see these numerical positioning values up here in the Options bar. At which point, go ahead and select the upper left point in this tiny reference point matrix over on the far left side of the Options bar. Notice that X is 0, which is just fine, meaning that it's flush with the left edge of the canvas. The value I want to modify is this Y value right here, and I want it to read -1000, so that the top edge of this layer is 1000 pixels above the top of the canvas, at which point I'll press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac to accept that value, and then I'll press Enter or Return again in order to commit my changes. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. Now I want the stars to mingle in with their blue sky background. I want the stars to remain nice and bright, and I want to drop out the dark stuff. So once again, I'll change the blend mode of this layer by clicking on the word Normal in the upper left corner of the Layers panel, and then I'll choose Screen, which is the foremost brightening blend mode inside Photoshop. And we end up with this effect here. Now, if you're looking closely, you'll notice that we have a problem. There's a ton of stars, tiny little faraway stars, in front of what is really the planet Mars, but it's supposed to be this planet's moon. Obviously, that doesn't work. So what we need to do is cut Mars out of the stars, and we're going to do that by first loading Mars's selection outline by pressing the Control key or the Command key on the Mac and clicking on the thumbnail, very important, for the Mars layer. And notice that goes ahead and loads the edges of that layer as a selection outline. Now, if I were to drop down and click on the Add Layer Mask icon at the bottom of the Layers panel, that would load that selection outline as a layer mask, and it would keep the stars inside of Mars and get rid of the stars outside Mars, which is exactly the opposite of what we want. So the better thing to do is to press Control Z or Command Z on the Mac to undo that change, and then go up to the Select menu and choose Inverse. And that will deselect Mars and select everything outside Mars. So it reverses the selection. And we can see that if I press Control-0 or Command-0 on a Mac to zoom out slightly so that we can see the marching ants surrounding the entire canvas. And then with the stars layer selected, once again, drop down to the Add Layer Mask icon at the bottom of the Layers panel and click on it. And that will cut Mars out so that it's appropriately opaque and therefore blocking the stars behind it. And that's how you align a layer to a selection outline, as well as how you load a layer mask as a selection or load the outline of a layer itself as a selection by pressing the Control key or the Command key on the Mac and clicking on its thumbnail.